In our conversation about mass incarceration and ministry, or evangelism to the incarcerated, we need to deal with some of the assumptions that we might have about incarceration and about evangelism. Who deserves or who is worthy of our ministry efforts? Who is deserving and who is worthy of our evangelism effort? And that leads to a power dynamic, and a power dynamic that is oftentimes rooted in the racial dynamic. The racialized aspect of mass incarceration and ministry to incarcerated cannot be ignored. The high percentage of Black, brown, and red bodies that are incarcerated, particularly in the United States. And because of the racialized aspect of incarceration, evangelism to or towards the incarcerated also is very racialized. Professor Willie Jennings notes that salvific viability is oftentimes connected to approximation of whiteness, meaning that those who can approximate or demonstrate aspects of white culture or white American society are probably deemed as more redeemable, are probably seen as more reachable with the gospel of Jesus Christ. And so, as Jennings points out, white indicates a high salvific viability. Whites are more likely to respond to the gospel because of their intellectual capacity, because of the cultural norms and values and ideas. Whiteness lends itself more to a Christian witness. The other side of that equation would be that Blackness or non-whiteness, Black, brown, and red bodies, therefore, there is a certain amount of doubt, a certain amount of uncertainty of their potential saving grace. And so an additional effort is needed when a white community, a Christian community, is trying to reach a Black and brown and red community. Salvation within Black and brown and red communities are not always assured. It has moments of doubt. And so because the incarcerated population is overwhelmingly, in terms of numbers, Black and brown and red bodies, is there an assumption that these bodies are deserving of punishment? Is there an assumption that these bodies are more difficult to reach with the gospel, and that these bodies are less liable or possible that they are going to have their own faith and develop a depth of their own faith? How we develop evangelistic efforts towards the incarcerated will have a highly racialized element, because there are assumptions about the salvific viability of those who are incarcerated. So evangelism then becomes understood through this lens. It is the blessed, the privileged, the spiritually superior with the greater intellectual capacity who is going into the prison system to help those who are morally reprobate, those who are less responsible, those who have less intellectual capacity, those who are less spiritual. And so those who are coming in as trying to evangelize to this population on the inside will feel a responsibility, a type of a burden, to say, I have a burden and a responsibility to transfer my knowledge to the inside population. I have a burden to impose, and maybe a responsibility to impose my version of the gospel message as those who are the privileged and the blessed, to reach those who are less privileged, less blessed, and those who have less knowledge than those who are coming in from the outside. It creates a disturbing and a situation that needs deconstructing, that our assumptions around evangelism to the incarcerated might have dysfunctional narratives and imaginations tied in to them. And this is where an appropriate and a thoughtful theological response is necessary, that our responses are not simply a sociological response to the assumptions around incarceration, but that there is a profound theological response that is tied in to how we understand the gospel in a context like this. And I'm going to draw from the work of Old Testament Professor Walter Brueggemann. And Walter Brueggemann makes the distinction between a theology of celebration and a theology of suffering, a theology of ascent and a theology of descent, a theology of praise and a theology of lament. Celebration, ascent, and praise means that those who are in places of the haves, who have possessions, who have material luxuries, who have a safety and security in society. They operate out of a management and stewardship approach to good things. In fact, the world is generally a good place. It is a safe place because the world treats those in the theology of celebration well. Life is generally good. Life is generally whole. It is complete. You are already experiencing shalom because you have a good life in the world that you live in. God, therefore, is a nurturer, a caregiver, maybe even a maternal figure who takes care of you because you feel taken care of. And because these things are good, the status quo is what you want to maintain. You like the way the tax rates are because it benefits you. You like the way the system is set up because it benefits you. So a theology of celebration generates praise because there are good things that are happening in the world around you. But there is a flip side to this, which is the theology of suffering. And Brueggemann talks about the theology of suffering as not one of management and stewardship, but one of survival and salvation. The world is not a good place. The world is an evil place. The world is a challenging place. Life is not healthy and it's not whole. Life is precarious and it's always on the edge. God is not a nurturer, but in fact, you need a God who is a warrior, who comes and smites all of your enemies. And you don't want to maintain the status quo because the status quo will harm you. The status quo will hurt you. What you want to do is fight injustice. So as Brueggemann sets apart these two different theological frameworks, the theology of celebration and the theology of suffering, one could assume that those who live in the theology of celebration, our job as the privileged, as the blessed, our job is to take what we know and to dump it onto those who are in the theology of suffering. But what shalom, Brueggemann argues, is what shalom is not one over the other, but the presence of both. That shalom and the fullness of God is found both in celebration and in suffering. Our understanding of who God is, who Jesus is, requires the theology of celebration and the theology of suffering. I'll give you an example of this. Picture a 13-year-old girl in two very different settings in the world. The first setting is of the richest community you can think of. Here it would be Pasadena, a rich community with very wealthy folks, and there's a gated community. And you sneak into that gated community, and you knock on the door of a family, and a 13-year-old girl answers, and you start asking questions about the nature of heaven. And you ask her, so what do you think heaven is like? And that 13-year-old girl will respond, oh, heaven's going to be fantastic. Heaven is going to be all the good things I have here on earth, just better versions of it. On earth, I have a Dell desktop. In heaven, I'm getting a Mac Airbook. On earth, I have a Toyota Yaris. In heaven, I'm getting a Tesla. On earth, I have a small 19-inch TV. In heaven, I'm getting an 85-inch LCD, the full thing with plasma and the full hookup. So for a 13-year-old, a teenager in the United States who lives in a very wealthy community, a picture of heaven emerges that is all the good things she has on earth, just better versions of it. Now we take that same question and ask another 13-year-old girl, but in a radically different context. This 13-year-old lives after the earthquake in Haiti, after a tsunami in Southeast Asia, or a refugee camp in Darfur, Sudan, or a refugee camp in Lebanon. And we go to that refugee camp and we ask that 13-year-old girl, what do you think heaven is going to be like? And her answer will be radically different than the 13-year-old girl in Beverly Hills or in Pasadena. Her answer will be, heaven is nothing like the world I'm living in right now. Heaven is a place where water and food are nearby. I don't have to walk for miles and miles to get water that's not even very clean. Heaven is a place where my parents have not been killed by bombs that have been dropped on our homes. Heaven is a place where I actually have a home. Heaven is a place where I don't worry about getting raped every night. Heaven is nothing like the place I'm living in right now. Now, our tendency and our instinct is to say that 13-year-old in Pasadena, that 13-year-old in Beverly Hills has everything to offer and to give to that 13-year-old in Darfur, Sudan. In fact, what we're going to do is we're going to maybe make a little package and be an angel and pick an angel off a tree and send a little package to that poor girl over in Sudan. Or maybe we'll fill a shoebox with used toys that we don't use anymore and play with anymore and send it over to Sudan. But what we're seeing there is an incomplete theology. And what Brueggemann would argue is that the person in the theology of celebration who has all these good things is as much in need of the understanding of the gospel with those who are without. That the picture of heaven is both and. The picture of heaven is both that 13-year-old in Pasadena who doesn't get the full scope of the gospel because she doesn't understand a theology of suffering, but also the 13-year-old in Sudan who doesn't get the full scope of the gospel because she doesn't understand the theology of celebration. That's why the gospel is both the death of Jesus and the crucifixion of Jesus on the cross, but it is also the resurrection. It is the suffering and pain that is in the world, but it is also the hope of the resurrection. And we are incomplete in our gospel if we think those who are on the outside have all the answers that we are going to dump to those on the inside. The ministry of the incarcerated church is the space where both the theology of celebration and the theology of suffering can come together and worship together. It is not one side saying, I have all the answers, and therefore let me just regurgitate my 4 spiritual laws on you. It is instead the fullness of the gospel experienced by those in the place of celebration and in the place of suffering, in the place of the resurrection, but also in the place of crucifixion, those coming together. And that is really the communication of the gospel message within our system of incarceration.